Vietnamese is the national, official language of Vietnam. It is the native language of Vietnamese people, and of about 3 million Vietnamese residing elsewhere. It also is spoken as a first or second language by many ethnic minorities of Vietnam. It is part of the Austroasiatic language family, of which it has, by far, the most speakers. Vietnamese vocabulary has borrowings from Chinese, and it formerly used a modified set of Chinese characters called Ca Nom given vernacular pronunciation. The Vietnamese alphabet in use today is a Latin alphabet with additional diacritics for tones, and certain letters. Geographic distribution. As the national language, Vietnamese is spoken throughout Vietnam by ethnic Vietnamese and by Vietnam's many minorities. A few thousand native speakers live just across the border in China. It also is spoken in overseas Vietnamese communities, most notably in the United States, where it has more than 1 million speakers and is the sixth most spoken language. It is the seventh most spoken language in Australia. In France, Vietnamese is the most spoken Asian language and the eighth most spoken immigrant language. Linguistic classification. Vietnamese was identified more than 150 years ago as part of the Mono-Euro-Khmer branch of the Austroasiatic language family. Later, Madagascar was found to be more closely related to Vietnamese than other Mono-Euro-Khmer languages, and a Viet-Madagascar subgrouping was established, also including Thai Vietnamese, Ka copyright T, Hung, etc. The term Vietic was proposed by Hayes, who proposed to redefine Viet-Madagascar as referring to a sub-branch of Vietic containing only Vietnamese and Madagascar. The term Vietic is used, among others, by Ga copyright Ra Difloth, with a slightly different proposal on subclassification, within which the term Viet-Madagascar refers to a lower subgrouping consisting of Vietnamese dialects, Madagascar dialects, and Nguyen. Lexicon. As a result of 1,000 years of Chinese rule, much of the Vietnamese lexicon relating to science and politics is derived from Chinese or Euro-Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary. Some 30% to 60% of the lexical stock is naturalized word borrowings from China, although many compound words are composed of native Vietnamese words combined with naturalized word borrowings. As a result of French occupation, Vietnamese has since had many words borrowed from the French language, for example car fare. Nowadays, many new words are being added to the language's lexicon due to heavy Western cultural influence. These are usually borrowed from English, for example TV. Sometimes these borrowings are calques literally translated into Vietnamese. Phonology. Vowels. Like other Southeast Asian languages, Vietnamese has a comparatively large number of vowels. Below is a vowel diagram of Hanoi Vietnamese. Front, central, and low vowels are unrounded, whereas the back vowels are rounded. The vowels accent, E unregistered trademark and a florin, A, are pronounced very short, much shorter than the other vowels. Thus, E and accent are basically pronounced the same except that E unregistered trademark E, is of normal length while accent, E unregistered trademark is shorter. The same applies to the vowels longer, E and shorter florin, A. In addition to single vowels, Vietnamese has diphthongs and triphthongs. The diphthongs consist of the main vowel component followed by a shorter semi-vowel off-glide to a high front position, E, a high back position, Eshi, or a central position, E unregistered trademark I. The centering diphthongs are formed with only the three high vowels as the main vowel. They are generally spelled as ear, e-degree, way when they end a word and are spelled ear, e-degree, way, respectively, when they are followed by a consonant. There are also restrictions on the high off-glides. The high front off-glide cannot occur after a front vowel nucleus and the high back off-glide cannot occur after a back vowel nucleus. The correspondence between the orthography and pronunciation is complicated. For example, the off-glide, E is usually written as I. However, it may also be represented with Y. In addition, in the diphthongs, E and E the letters Y and I also indicate the pronunciation of the main vowel, I equals a florin plus, E, I equals a plus, E. Thus, T hand is, Thai while Thai ear is, Thai E. Similarly, U and O indicate different pronunciations of the main vowel, or equals a florin plus, eshi, O equals a plus, eshi. Thus, for brass is, te degree ashi while for ra silk is, te degree eshi. The four triphthongs are formed by adding front and back off-glides to the centering diphthongs. Similarly to the restrictions involving diphthongs, a triphthong with front nucleus cannot have a front off-glide and a triphthong with a back nucleus cannot have a back off-glide. From the front and back off-glides, eshi, many phonological descriptions analyze these as consonant glides. Thus, a word such as I sent you, where, phonetically, unregistered trademark eshi, would be analyzed phonemically as consonants. The consonants that occur in Vietnamese are listed below in the Vietnamese orthography with the phonetic pronunciation to the right. Some consonant sounds are written with only one letter, other consonant sounds are written with a two-letter digraph, and others are written with more than one letter or digraph. Not all dialects of Vietnamese have the same consonant in a given word. See the language variations section for further elaboration. The analysis of syllable final orthographic ch and nh in Hanoi Vietnamese has had different analyses. One analysis has final ch, nh as being phonemes, contrasting with syllable final t, c, and n, and g, and identifies final ch with the syllable initial ch. The other analysis has final ch and nh as predictable allophonic variants of the velar phonemes and that occur before upper front vowels I and a. Tones. Vietnamese vowels are all pronounced with an inherent tone. Tones differ in length, pitch contour, pitch height, phonation. Tone is indicated by diacritics written above or below the vowel. The 6 tones in the northern varieties, with their self-referential Vietnamese names, are. Other dialects of Vietnamese have fewer tones. See the language variation section for a brief survey of tonal differences among dialects. In Vietnamese poetry, tones are classed into 2 groups. Words with tones belonging to a particular tone group must occur in certain positions with a poetic verse. Vietnamese Catholics practice a distinctive style of prayer recitation called Ana Si Kinh, in which each tone is assigned a specific note or sequence of notes. Language variation. There are various mutually intelligible regional varieties, the main 5 being. Vietnamese has traditionally been divided into 3 dialect regions, North, Central, and South. However, Michel Furlas and Nguyen Thai Car copyright N offer evidence for considering a North-Central region separate from Central. The term Hort Amnam refers to dialects spoken from northern An province to southern Tha Thia N province that preserve archaic features that have been lost in other modern dialects. These dialect regions differ mostly in their sound systems, but also in vocabulary and grammar. The North-Central and Central regional varieties, which have a significant amount of vocabulary differences, are generally less mutually intelligible to northern and southern speakers. There is less internal variation within the southern region than the other regions due to its relatively late settlement by Vietnamese speakers. The North-Central region is particularly conservative. Along the coastal areas, regional variation has been neutralized to a certain extent, while more mountainous regions preserve more variation. As for sociolinguistic attitudes, the North-Central varieties are often felt to be peculiar, or difficult to understand by speakers of other dialects. The large movements of people between North and South beginning in the mid-20th century and continuing to this day have resulted in a sizable number of Southern residents speaking in the Northern accent dialect and, to a greater extent, Northern residents speaking in the Southern accent dialect. Following the Geneva Accords of 1954 that called for the temporary division of the country, about 1 million Northerners moved south as part of Operation Passage to Freedom. About 3% of that number of people made the move in the reverse direction. Following the reunification of Vietnam in 1975 (76), Northern and North-Central speakers from the densely populated Red River Delta and the traditionally poorer provinces of Nha, Ha Ta copyright NH and Quay Pound NG Bar NH have continued to move south to look for better economic opportunities, beginning with the Hanoi government's New Economic Zones program, which lasted from 1975 (85). The first half of the program, resulted in 1.3 million people sent to the new economic zones, majority of which were relocated in the southern half of the country in previously uninhabited areas, of which 550,000 were northerners. The second half saw almost 1 million northerners relocated to the NEZs. As well, government and military personnel, many from northern and north-central Vietnam, are posted to various locations throughout the country, often away from their home regions. More recently, the growth of the free market system has resulted in business people and tourists traveling to distant parts of Vietnam. These movements have resulted in some small blending of the dialects, but more significantly, have made the northern dialect more easily understood in the south and vice versa. Most southerners, when singing modern popular Vietnamese songs, do so in the northern accent. This is true in Vietnam as well as in the overseas Vietnamese communities. The syllable initial ch and tr digraphs are pronounced distinctly in north-central, central, and southern varieties, but are merged in northern varieties. The north-central varieties preserve three distinct pronunciations for d, gi, and r, whereas the north has a three-way merger and the central and south have a merger of d and gi while keeping r distinct. At the end of syllables, palatals ch and nh have merged with alveolars t and n, which, in turn, have also partially merged with velars c and ng in central and southern varieties. In addition to the regional variation described above, there is also a merger of L and N in certain rural varieties. Variation between L and N can be found even in mainstream Vietnamese in certain words. For example, the numeral 5 appears as na florin m by itself and in compound numerals like na florin m may degree I 50, but appears as la florin m in may degree ai la florin m 15. In some northern varieties, this numeral appears with an initial nh instead of l, high may degree inha florin m 25, versus mainstream high may degree I la florin m. The consonant clusters that were originally present in Middle Vietnamese have been lost in almost all modern Vietnamese varieties. However, some speech communities have preserved some of these archaic clusters. Sky is blue with a cluster in ha-onho but try in Southern Vietnamese and gia I in Hanoi Vietnamese. Tones, generally, the northern varieties have 6 tones while those in other regions have 5 tones. The ha and ga pound tones are distinct in north and some north-central varieties but have merged in central, southern, and some north-central varieties. Some north-central varieties have a merger of the nga pound and now ng tones while keeping the ha tone distinct. Still other north-central varieties have a three-way merger of ha, nga pound, and now ng resulting in a 4-tone system. In addition, there are several phonetic differences in the tones among dialects. The table above shows the pitch contour of each tone using Chow tone number notation. Glottalization is indicated with the a OA degree euro symbol. Breathy voice with a euro OA euro. Glottal stop with a euro ea euro. Subdialectal variants are separated with commas. Grammar. Vietnamese, like many languages in Southeast Asia, is an analytic language. Vietnamese does not use morphological marking of case, gender, number or tense. Also like other languages in the region, Vietnamese syntax conforms to subject a verb a object word order, is head initial, and is a noun classifier system. Additionally, it is pro-drop, wh in situ, and allows verb serialization. Some Vietnamese sentences with English word glosses and translations are provided below. Writing systems. Up to the late 19th century, 2 writing systems based on Chinese characters were used in Vietnam. All formal writing, including government business, scholarship and formal literature, was done in literary Chinese. Folk literature in Vietnamese was recorded using the Ca Nam script, in which many Chinese characters were borrowed and many more modified and invented to represent native Vietnamese words. Created in the 13th century or earlier, the Nam writing reached its zenith in the 18th century when many Vietnamese writers and poets composed their works in Nam, most notably Nguyen Du and Hoc Chua Centen He degree Ng. However, it was only used for official purposes during the brief Ha and Ta Cent Ycn dynasties. a Vietnamese Catholic Nguyen Truong to send petitions to the court which suggested a Chinese character-based syllabary which would be used for Vietnamese sounds. However, his petition failed. The French colonial administration sought to eliminate the Chinese writing system, Confucianism, and other Chinese influences from Vietnam by getting rid of Nam. A Romanization of Vietnamese was codified in the 17th century by the French Jesuit missionary Alexander de Rhodes, based on works of earlier Portuguese missionaries Gaspar do Amaral and Antucubnio Barbosa. This Vietnamese alphabet was gradually expanded from its initial domain in Christian writing to become more popular among the general public. However, the Romanized script did not come to predominate until the beginning of the 20th century, when education became widespread and a simpler writing system was found more expedient for teaching and communication with the general population. Under French colonial rule, French superseded Chinese in administration. Vietnamese written with the alphabet became required for all public documents in 1910 by issue of a decree by the French Ra Copyright Sidence Super Copyright Rear of the Protectorate of Tonkin. By the middle of the 20th century virtually all writing was done in Quai Sin Ga, which became the official script on independence. Kho was still in use on early North Vietnamese and late French Indo-Chinese banknotes issued after World War II but fell out of official use shortly thereafter. Only a few scholars and some extremely elderly people are able to read Ka Na M today. In China, members of the Jing minority still write in Ka Na M. Changes in the script were made by French scholars and administrators and by conferences held after independence during 1954–1974. The script now reflects a so-called Middle Vietnamese dialect that has vowels and final consonants most similar to Northern dialects and initial consonants most similar to Southern dialects. This Middle Vietnamese is presumably close to the Hanoi variety as spoken sometime after 1600 but before the present. Computer support. The Unicode character set contains all Vietnamese characters and the Vietnamese currency symbol. On systems that do not support Unicode, many 8-bit Vietnamese code pages are available such as Visha or CP1258. Where ASCII must be used, Vietnamese letters are often typed using the Viqua convention, though this is largely unnecessary with the increasing ubiquity of Unicode. There are many software tools that help type true Vietnamese text on US keyboards, such as WinVNKEY and UNKey on Windows, or MacVNKey on Macintosh. History. It seems likely that in the distant past, Vietnamese shared more characteristics common to other languages in the Austroasiatic family, such as an inflectional morphology and a richer set of consonant clusters, which have subsequently disappeared from the language. However, Vietnamese appears to have been heavily influenced by its location in the Southeast Asian Sprachbund, with the result that it has acquired or converged toward characteristics such as isolating morphology and tonogenesis. These characteristics have become part of many of the genetically unrelated languages of Southeast Asia. For example, Thai, Tzat, and Vietnamese each developed tones as a phonemic feature. The ancestor of the Vietnamese language was originally based in the area of the Red River in what is now northern Vietnam, and during the subsequent expansion of the Vietnamese language and people into what is now central and southern Vietnam, characteristic tonal variations have emerged. Vietnamese was primarily influenced by Chinese, which came to predominate politically in the 2nd century BC. After Vietnam achieved independence in the 10th century, the ruling class adopted literary Chinese as the medium of government, scholarship and literature. With the dominance of Chinese came radical importation of Chinese vocabulary and grammatical influence. Much of the Vietnamese lexicon in all realms consists of Sino-Vietnamese words. When France invaded Vietnam in the late 19th century, French gradually replaced Chinese as the official language in education and government. Vietnamese adopted many French terms, such as a section m, ga, si mi, and ba pi ba. In addition, many Sino-Vietnamese terms were devised for Western ideas imported through the French. Henri Maspero described 6 periods of the Vietnamese language: pre-Vietnamese, also known as Proto-Vietnam or Proto-Vietnam, the ancestor of Vietnamese and the related Muong language. Proto-Vietnamese, the oldest reconstructible version of Vietnamese, dated to just before the entry of massive amounts of Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary into the language, c. 7th to 9th century AD. At this date, the language had 3 tones. Archaic Vietnamese, the state of the language upon adoption of the Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary, c. 10th century AD. Ancient Vietnamese, the language represented by two norm characters in the China Sea Euro-Vietnamese glossary Huayiyu. By this point a tone split had happened in the language, leading to 6 tones but a loss of contrastive voicing among consonants. Middle Vietnamese, the language of the Vietnamese Euro-Portuguese Euro-Latin dictionary of the Jesuit missionary Alexander de Rhodes. Modern Vietnamese, from the 19th century. Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong, the following diagram shows the phonology of Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong, along with the outcomes in the modern language. 1 according to Furless, and are not accepted by all researchers. Furless 1992 had an additional phoneme, and had the pre-glottalized consonant in place of the implosive consonant. Note that the latter two sounds are not all that different, both being voiced palatals and glottalic. 2 The fricatives indicated above in parentheses developed as allophones of stop consonants occurring between vowels. These fricatives were not present in Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong, as indicated by their absence in Muong, but were evidently present in the later Proto-Vietnamese stage. Subsequent loss of the minor syllable prefixes phonemicized the fricatives. Furless 1992 proposes that originally there were both voiced and voiceless fricatives, corresponding to original voiced or voiceless stops, but Furless 2009 appears to have abandoned that hypothesis, suggesting that stops were softened and voiced at approximately the same time, according to the following pattern: P, B, T, D, K, E, S, E, C, I, T. E. Florin, 3 In Middle Vietnamese, the outcome of these sounds was written with a hooked B, representing a that was still distinct from V. See above. For it is unclear what this sound was. According to Furless 1992, in the archaic Vietnamese period it was E1/2, distinct at the time from R. The following initial clusters occurred, with outcomes indicated: PR, BR, TR, Dr, KR, GRS, PL, BLMV, BL Northern GI, Southern TR, KL, GLMV, TLTR, MLMV, MLMNH, KJGI. Note also that a large number of words were borrowed from Middle Chinese, forming part of the Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary. These caused the original introduction of the retroflex sounds and into the language. Origin of the tones: Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong had no tones to speak of. The tones later developed in some of the daughter languages from distinctions in the initial and final consonants. Vietnamese tones developed as follows. Glottal ending syllables ended with a glottal stop, while fricative ending syllables ended with or. Both types of syllables could co-occur with a resonant. At some point, a tone split occurred, as in many other Southeast Asian languages. Essentially, an allophonic distinction developed in the tones, whereby the tones in syllables with voiced initials were pronounced differently from those with voiceless initials. Subsequent to this, the plain voiced stops became voiceless and the allotons became new phonemic tones. Note that the implosive stops were unaffected, and in fact developed tonally as if they were unvoiced. As noted above, Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong had sesquisyllabic words with an initial minor syllable. When a minor syllable occurred, the main syllable's initial consonant was intervocalic and as a result suffered lenition, becoming a voiced fricative. The minor syllables were eventually lost, but not until the tone split had occurred. As a result, words in modern Vietnamese with voiced fricatives occur in all 6 tones, and the tonal register reflects the voicing of the minor syllable prefix and not the voicing of the main syllable stop in Proto-Vietnamese Euro-Muong that produced the fricative. For similar reasons, words beginning with and occur in both registers. Middle Vietnamese, the writing system used for Vietnamese is based closely on the system developed by Alexander de Rhodes for his Vietnamese Euro-Portuguese Euro-Latin dictionary, published in 1651. It reflects the pronunciation of the Vietnamese of Hanoi at the time, a stage commonly termed Middle Vietnamese. The pronunciation of the rhyme of the syllable, that is all parts other than the initial consonant, appears nearly identical between Middle Vietnamese and modern Hanoi pronunciation. On the other hand, the Middle Vietnamese pronunciation of the initial consonant differs greatly from all modern dialects, and in fact is significantly closer to the modern Saigon dialect than the modern Hanoi dialect. The following diagram shows the orthography and pronunciation of Middle Vietnamese. 1. P occurs only at the end of a syllable. 2. This symbol, Latin small letter b with flourish, looks like. It has a rounded hook that starts halfway up the left side and curves about 180 degrees counterclockwise, ending below the bottom left corner. 3. J does not occur at the beginning of a syllable, but can occur at the end of a syllable, where it is notated I or Y, and after and, where it is notated A. This A, and the it notated, have disappeared from the modern language. Note that B, E and P never contrast in any position, suggesting that they are allophones. Likewise for GI, E, and YA, J. The language also has 3 clusters at the beginning of syllables, which have since disappeared: TL modern TR, BL modern GI, TR, MLMNH modern NH. Most of the unusual correspondences between spelling and modern pronunciation are explained by Middle Vietnamese. Note in particular, the Rhodes system has 2 different B letters, a regular B and a hooked B, in which the upper section of the curved part of the B extends leftward past the vertical bar and curls down again in a semicircle. This apparently represented a voiced bilabial fricative. Within a century or so, both and had merged as, spelled as V. The Rhodes system has a second medial glide that is written A and appears in some words with initial D and hooked B. These later disappear. A was alveolar, whereas D was dental. The choice of symbols was based on the dental rather than alveolar nature of and its allophone, a degree in Spanish and other Romance languages. The inconsistency with the symbols assigned to versus was based on the lack of any such place distinction between the two, with the result that the stop consonant appeared more normal than the fricative. In both cases, the implosive nature of the stops does not appear to have had any role in the choice of symbol. X was alveolar palatal rather than dental, as in the modern language. In 17th century Portuguese, the common language of the Jesuits, S was an apical-alveolar sibilant, while X was a palato-alveolar. The similarity of apical-alveolar to the Vietnamese retroflex led to the assignment of S and X as above. De Rhodes orthography also made use of an apex diacritic to indicate a final labial velar nasal, an allophone of that is peculiar to the Hanoi dialect to the present day. This diacritic is often mistaken for a tilde in modern reproductions of early Vietnamese writing. Wordplay, a language game known as Na Cubed Lai is used by Vietnamese speakers. Na Cubed Lai involves switching the tones in a pair of words and also the order of the 2 words or the first consonant and rhyme of each word. The resulting Na Cubed Lai pair preserves the original sequence of tones. Some examples. The resulting transformed phrase often has a different meaning but sometimes may just be a nonsensical word pair. Na Cubed Lai can be used to obscure the original meaning and thus soften the discussion of a socially sensitive issue, as with da-inmri and ho-pound-ng degree A, or, when implied, to deliver a hidden subtextual message, as with bar-i-tas and y. Naturally, Na Cubed Lai can be used for a humorous effect. Another word game somewhat reminiscent of Pig Latin is played by children. Here a nonsense syllable is prefixed onto a target word's syllables, then their initial consonants and rhymes are switched with the tone of the original word remaining on the new switched rhyme. This language game is often used as a secret, or coded language useful for obscuring messages from adult comprehension. Examples: see the Tale of Kiu for an extract of the first 6 lines of Tria en Kiu, an epic narrative poem by the celebrated poet Nguyen Du, registered trademark E, which is often considered the most significant work of Vietnamese literature. It was originally written in Nam and is widely taught in Vietnam today. See also Austroasiatic languages, Kho, Ka Nam, Sino-Tibetan languages, Sino-Vietnamese vocabulary, Vietic languages, Vietnamese alphabet, Vietnamese literature, Vietnamese morphology, Vietnamese phonology, Vietnamese pronouns, Vietnamese studies, Vietnamese syntax, notes. Bibliography, general, die degree ng, Quay pound ng Ham Viet Nam Va Florin N Ha Si Za Yu, Outline History of Vietnamese Literature. Saigon, Bar Registered Trademark Quay Si Gia Geo Da Yen Si. Amino, MB Homonyms and Puns and Vietnamese. Language, 23, 239-244. Amino, MB Studies in Vietnamese Grammar. University of California Publications in Linguistics. Berkeley, University of California Press. Hashimoto, Mantaro The Current State of Sino-Vietnamese Studies. Journal of Chinese Linguistics, 6, 1-26. Nguyen, Aanh Ho NTC's Vietnamese Euro-English Dictionary. NTC Language Dictionaries. Lincolnwood, Illinois, NTC Pub. Press. ISBN. Nguyen, Aanh Ho Vietnamese, Tia Ng via T Ka Ng Sun Fair Yen N. Amsterdam, John Benjamin's Publishing Company. Rhodes, Alexander de Taua Florin N. Annam Lucitan Latine, Original, Dictionarium Annamaticum Lucitanum A Latinum Hanoi, Ku Ha Si Zap Hound Ha and Registered Trademark I, Thompson, Lawrence C. A Vietnamese Reference Grammar. Seattle, University of Washington Press. Honolulu, University of Hawaii Press. Wei Ban Ku Ha Si Zap Hound Ha and Registered Trademark I via T Nam Ga Fair Ptia Ng via T, Vietnamese Grammar. Hanoi, Ku Ha Si Zap Hound Ha and Registered Trademark I. Sound System, Brunel, Mark. Tone Perception in Northern and Southern Vietnamese. Journal of Phonetics, 37, 1, 79-96. Brunel, Mark. Northern and Southern Vietnamese Tone Co-articulation, a Comparative Case Study. Journal of Southeast Asian Linguistics, 1, 49-62. McCord, Alexis Final Consonants and Glottalization, New Perspectives from Hanoi Vietnamese. Phonetica 61 ppA 119 a Euro 146, Nguyen, Va Florin N. La Pound I. And Edmondson, Gerald A. Tones and Voice Quality in Modern Northern Vietnamese, Instrumental Case Studies. Mona Euro Khmer Studies, 28, 1-18, Thompson, Lawrence E. Saigon Phonemics. Language, 35, 454-476. Pragmatics and Language Variation, Alves, Mark J. 2007. A look at North Central Vietnamese in Seal's 12 papers from the 12th Annual Meeting of the Southeast Asian Linguistics Society 2002, edited by Rattray Wayland A. Al Canberra, Australia, 1-7. Pacific Linguistics, Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies, The Australian National University, Alves, Mark J. and Nguyen, Duy Degree Ng Notes on Than Chi Degree Ng Vietnamese in An Province. In M. Alves, M. Sidgwell, and D. Gill, Seals 8, Papers from the 8th Annual Meeting of the Southeast Asian Linguistics Society 1998. Canberra, Pacific Linguistics, The Australian National University, Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies, HONG, Tha Ka Sentu Tia Ng via T Tra N Ka Si Mia Nient Na Degree AC, Phi Degree Ng Nga Ha Si, Vietnamese in different areas of the country, Dialectology. Ha and Registered Trademark I, Ku Ha Si Zap Hound Ha and Registered Trademark I. Honda, Khoi Chi Fo and Phonation Types in Latin Vietnamese Tones. In P. Warren and C. I. Watson, Proceedings of the 11th Australasian International Conference on Speech Science and Technology. Auckland, New Zealand, University of Auckland. Luong, H. Y. Van Plural Markers and Personal Pronouns in Vietnamese Person Reference, An Analysis of Pragmatic Ambiguity in Negative Models. Anthropological Linguistics, 29, 49-70. Pham, Andrea Ho Vietnamese Tonal System in Gay Loc, A Preliminary Report. In C. Frigini, M. Hirayama, and S. Mackenzie, Toronto Working Papers in Linguistics, Special Issue on Similarity in Phonology. Auckland, New Zealand, University of Auckland. Safena, Srikampa Politeness Strategies in Hanoi Vietnamese Speech. Mona Euro Khmer Studies, 34, 137-157, Safena, Srikampa Comparison of Greetings in the Vietnamese Dialects of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. Mona Euro Khmer Studies, 35, 83-99, var copyright, Van Hvi Degree Ng Phonetic Properties of Vietnamese Tones Across Dialects. Indy Bradley, Papers in Southeast Asian Linguistics, Tonation. Sydney, Pacific Linguistics, The Australian National University. Degree Ng, Hyula var Inhan Zach Copyright T var RC Diafloran M Car Section of var Section N Trungtha Cent M Quay Pound Ng Nam Ay Ha and Registered Trademark IN. Some notes on special qualities of the rhyme and local Quay Pound Ng Nam speech in Ha and Registered Trademark IN. In Ma and Registered Trademark T Zar var Yen and Ga en Ga Ha Si via T Nam, some linguistics issues in Vietnam. Ha Na and Registered Trademark I, NHA Xua Yen T Bar Pound NAAI Ha Si Va Trung Ha Si Chua N Gia P. Historical and Comparative, Alves, Mark, What's So Chinese About Vietnamese? In Papers from the 9th Annual Meeting of the Southeast Asian Linguistics Society. University of California, Berkeley. PDF at the Wayback Machine, Cook, Joseph. A pronominal reference in Thai, Burmese, and Vietnamese. University of California Publications in Linguistics. Berkeley, University of California Press. Gray Gerson, Kenneth J. A Study of Middle Vietnamese Phonology. Bulletin de la Socia Copyright tar Copyright des études indochinoises, 44, 135-193, Nguyen, Aanh Ho Alexander de Rhodes Dictionary. Papers in Linguistics, 19, 1-18. Shorto, Harry L. Edited by Sidgwell, Paul, Cooper, Doug and Bauer, Christian. Amona Euro Khmer Comparative Dictionary. Canberra, Australian National University. Pacific Linguistics. ISBN, Thompson, Lawrence E. The History of Vietnamese Finals. Language, 43, 362-371. Orthography, Hordrakert, Andrew. Copyright Georges. Origine des particularités copyrightes de l'alphabet vietnamien. Da Centen via T Nam 3, 61 €68, English translation, McCord, Alexis. Hordrakert, Andrew. Copyright Georges. The Origin of the Peculiarities of the Vietnamese Alphabet. Mon Khmer Studies 39, 89 €104a. Nguyen, Aanh Ho Quay Sim Ga The Modern Writing System in Vietnam. Washington, D.C. Author. Nguyen, Aanh Ho Graphemic Borrowing from Chinese, The Case of Ca Nam M, Vietnam's Demotic Script. Bulletin of the Institute of History and Philology, Academia Sinica, 61, 383 €432. Nguyen, Aanh Ho Vietnamese. In P. T. Daniels, and W. Bright, The World's Writing Systems. New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-507993-7. Pedagogical, Nguyen, Bic Thuan Contemporary Vietnamese, An Intermediate Text. Southeast Asian Language Series. Northern Illinois University, Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Healy, Dana. Teach Yourself Vietnamese. Teach Yourself. Chicago, McGraw-Hill. ISBN, Oang, Phine. Nguyen, Xuan Vu. Trinh, Con Tram. Vietnamese Phrasebook. Hawthorne, Vic. Lonely Planet. ISBN, Moore, John. Colloquial Vietnamese, A Complete Language Course. London, Routledge. ISBN. 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 Nguyen, Aanh Ho Read Vietnamese, A Graded Course in Written Vietnamese. Rutland, Vermont, C. E. Tultul. La Saint-M, La 1/2 Duke. Amino, M.B. and Steenan, Diether von den Anonymous Reader. Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. Nguyen, A. Florin Ng Lia M. Vietnamese pronunciation. PALI Language Texts, Southeast Asia. Honolulu, University of Hawaii Press. External links, online lessons, online Vietnamese lessons from Northern Illinois University, USA Foreign Service Institute Vietnamese Basic Course, Vocabulary, Vietnamese Vocabulary List, Swadesh List of Vietnamese Basic Vocabulary Words, Nam Lookup from the Vietnamese Nam Preservation Foundation, Lexicon of Vietnamese Words borrowed from French by Juvenal, List of Japanese Vietnamese kanjis by Juvenal, Language Tools, the Vietnamese keyboard. Its layout is compared with US, UK, Canada, France, and Germany's keyboards. The Free Vietnamese Dictionary Project.